Oh gosh, how's it going? Thanks for being here. It's been a while since I've talked about video games. Very basic premise here is that Nintendo has been making games for decades that very specifically draw your attention to the fact that they're not real. They like to break your immersion. They like to display fantastical heightened realities that they're supposed to be cartoony. They're not supposed to be realistic. And on its own, yeah, it's like, oh, okay, that doesn't seem all that special. That seems fine. And it is. But as soon as you start comparing that sort of philosophy or that approach to so many other giant video game studios and companies, it is different, because a lot of those other companies for just as long have been prioritizing realism, and specifically photorealism in terms of graphics. And in fact, some of the most highly regarded video games of the last 10 to 15 years or even more have been games that have just done a fantastic job of capturing photorealistic visuals and effects to the best of the ability of the hardware that they appeared on. I don't know, I at least get the sense, maybe you have too, maybe you disagree, but I get the sense that there are tons of fans of video games who get cordoned off in that zone. Like, they stay committed to games that are as realistic as possible. I think they start to assume that that is what a good game is, and any game that doesn't have that same approach or doesn't pursue the same goals is bad. And like, why would they bother playing a bad game? I started thinking about how the difference between heightened cartoony games and realistic games kind of parallels the difference between animation and live action traditional filmmaking, because that's another area where you do ultimately have people who will just completely ignore animation. They just, I can't take it seriously. I associate that with kids stuff. It just doesn't seem as worthy to me as live action filmmaking. Now, we know that's incorrect. We understand that, I think, as fans of animation already, but I think it bears investigating a little bit, wondering why these more exaggerated forms of art, these more expressive forms of art are so valid, and why do they specifically try to draw your attention to the fact that they're not realistic? So that's what we're talking about today. And the thing that kicked this whole thing off was the somewhat recent announcement of a new Princess Peach game, Princess Peach Showtime, I think. And it's interesting. I'm not here to speculate about the gameplay or anything. However, an interesting component of this game is that it seems to all take place within one giant theater. It's all within that context, and we see so many reminders of the fact that this is all fake. Like, we see so many reminders of the fact that this is ultimately weirdly a stage show. And that it's not just out in the regular Mushroom Kingdom. And as I mentioned at the top, it's definitely not the first time that Nintendo has really focused on the fact that everything you're seeing in the game is very fake. Now, we hear all the time that immersion is key to creating a video game, a good video game, an effective video game. But at the same time, there are so many Nintendo games in particular that do the exact opposite. Any of the games focused around like craft materials in particular, I'll show some footage from quite a few of those here. There have been a lot of them at this point. The characters will sometimes break the fourth wall in a lot of Nintendo games. There are also like even just clear screens at the end of a game where all the characters are smiling at the camera and saying, "Oh, thanks for playing." All of that stuff, it breaks immersion very purposefully, and these are not things that those super realistic games would do. It would ruin their tone, and it would ruin their attempt to mimic live action filmmaking. It just wouldn't fit at all. And I would say something similar about Nintendo characters as a whole. Like, the vast majority of the time, these are not characters who are meant to be realistic, relatable, or believable. And that's what led me to one of the most important points here. This is an old quote from Miyamoto himself. I'll put the quote up on the screen, but just to paraphrase, basically he says that he thinks of his characters as a troupe of actors. Like he's not trying to imagine the world building. He's not trying to think of, oh, what's the Mushroom Kingdom really like? What are their core motivations for doing all these different things that they do in the game? Why are they suddenly racing go-karts against each other? Why are they suddenly playing baseball and soccer and tennis? So he even draws a comparison to the old Popeye characters, and he just says, yeah, like they're just, they are characters. They're almost aware of that fact. They're just out here having fun, and they're in different settings as required, based on whatever the creators want. That is what those characters are doing at that particular time. And I think that is such a fascinating idea because, again, I think it draws a very strong parallel to animation as compared to live action. And it was funny timing too, because I was recently starting to read this book called 7 Minutes by Norman Klein, where it's just a great history of American animation. And there's a fantastic quote from this one too that I'll put up on the screen here. But again, to paraphrase, he is clarifying the fact that in particular early silent animation was not trying to be realistic at all, and that it very often drew your attention to the fact that it was all phony, that this was just, projections on a flat screen, and that the sense of perspective created in the short was all artificial. It was just based on how the lines were drawn. It boils down to the fact that animation is doing a different job as compared to live action filmmaking. And in the same way, unrealistic video games, cartoony video games, are doing a very different job as compared to the hyper-realistic ones, which I think are actually just trying to do the job of live-action movies. So the heart of the matter, I think, is that we can never just assume there are shared priorities and goals between mediums, individual artworks, whatever it happens to be. And it's something I still find myself doing, not so much with animation or video games or music or anything like that, but with reviews, for example. Unconsciously I find myself saying, oh, reviews are all supposed to do this. They have to align with what I think their goals should be and what benefits me the most as a reader, as a viewer. It's just not the case. There are always different perspectives. There are always different priorities and always different interpretations of what that format, what that medium should be doing and what the creator wants it to be doing. And overall, this is something I'm sure I've said plenty of times before, but any opportunity to expand your personal taste and to really try something that could potentially open a door to a whole new genre, subgenre, style of work that you will really love in the future, please take it. Please take it. Whether it's a YouTube video from some channel you've never heard of before, whether it's a demo for a new game that looks like something you just wouldn't be into at all, just trying is worth so much. And personally, it's something that I just find so rewarding about the sheer accessibility of media that we have today through the internet. My gosh, a lot of rambling. Thank you so much for sticking around for the whole thing. As always, feel free to share your own thoughts. If you have something to say to me, go for it. I think that's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.